everybody, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Dust Jacket Radio. We got John Glaze here, and I'm with a special guest today. We got, in lieu of Jacob, we've got a much better guest. I would say, burn Jacob. He couldn't make it in today, so we got his wife instead, Alex Valdez. Goes by MC.
Yep, MC Valdez. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to have you on today because you have a set of skills that Jacob and I really don't. You're an amazing artist. And,
Thank you.
She is an avid reader of poetry as well. So she's got that whole edge of literature I haven't explored as well as you have. So it's really fun to talk to her about poetry and art and everything involved, and books as well, by the way. She's
definitely books. Yeah. Huge bibliophile.
Yes, absolutely. So she's got an impressive plethora of knowledge, of just wealth of information.
Oh, thank you. Look at these words. Oh my goodness.
I'm trying to drop all my $5 ones to impress you. But anyway, so yeah, you're a professional artist even, so right? You teach elementary school.
Oh, yeah. So I am an art teacher during the day, and then...
What grade do you teach?
I teach everybody, so I teach kindergarten all the way through 7th grade, and back in the day I also taught adult classes.
Oh, wow.
So a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and you have several degrees. I'm trying to remember all of your...
Several, only two. Only two. Yeah.
Okay.
I got my Bachelor's of Fine Arts at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and then I got my Master's of Arts in Teaching at Trinity here in town, in San Antonio.
Working on your Master's, right? Or no, I'm sorry, you're working on your doctorate.
Someday, yeah.
Someday, okay. That's
putting some stuff together.
Okay, cool. I heard rumblings of that. So, anyways, we got a really exciting topic today. I'm super excited to talk about it, and that's like really exciting, hot, awesome. Anyways, I'm like really stoked about this. I'm gonna bring out my California right there. I'm stoked about this. I'm stoked because we're talking about Haruki Murakami, one of my favorite authors. Definitely in my top 3.
Nice. That's up there.
Yeah.
Considering you've read a lot of books.
Yeah.
So that's impressive.
Yeah, he's really awesome. And I know you just started reading him yourself. So that's why.
I did. I kind of fell into his work accidentally, vicariously through another book that I highly recommend. It's called The M Train by Patti Smith. Amazing, amazing book. So in the middle of this story, she's going on a trip and she takes her most prized possessions with her. And one of those happens to be the Wind-Up Bird Chronicles.
That's pretty awesome.
But she loses it. And
what?
In the book, it's a memoir, essentially. She's completely devastated. She can't function without this book. And that got me thinking, I was just baffled. How can a book be that important? How can it become a prized possession, especially for someone that I really respect as an artist, Patti Smith? So that's how I got into Murakami.
Well, obviously, you hadn't read it at the time, because I could totally understand that. Just because, we'll talk about this in the near future, obviously, throughout the show, but Murakami's definitely, he makes a big impact on my life as I read more and more of him. What did you think as you read through the book? Was it...
Gosh, it's hard to just encapsulate everything because it's so vast. It's like reading a desert. That's always changing. Yeah. So that'll actually have a question for you, speaking of that.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So when you pick up something by Murakami, there's a lot of very intense words that I don't throw around lightly. It says on here that he's a genius, a mastermind. How is that? How do you think Murakami is one of the best writers that people often think about as a genius in the literary world?
That's a really good question. And it's kind of difficult to answer at the same time, but I think I have a good answer to that. At least as far as I'm concerned, whenever I'm reading him, I definitely see his genius peek through all the time. It's in his creation of his characters, his method of conveying loneliness and the whole mood. There's this mystique that comes along with his writing that's a mix of so many different styles that's so uniquely Japanese, yet so the Japanese don't like him because he's not Japanese.
Really?
Although he's really popular over there now. When he first came out, everyone was really critical of him because he's not very Japanese in style. But he brings in both his parents were, by the way, they were both Japanese literature professors. So
what?
Yeah, both of them.
And he didn't even become a writer until later in life.
That's correct. He was 29 before he even got the idea to write a book.
That's so interesting.
He's a really fascinating life, and you'll actually, as you read more and more of his works, he actually writes a little bit of himself in all of his characters, and you find out a little bit more about what his day-to-day life was like up until he's 29. So in Norwegian Wood, he draws heavily from his own life in Norwegian Wood. If you read that later, where he's a college student, he works at a record stop, and he's got kind of a series of really strange events that he's got a love triangle that develops in Norwegian Wood, which is a fascinating book. And I guess you haven't read that yet, so I can't talk too much about it.
Well, is that kind of a theme that runs across a lot of his writing, like the love triangles and the complicated interpersonal relationships?
Yeah, and he has these big, he has these really graphic sex scenes too that keeps coming up. And there's a lot of music is a big element in all of it too. So yeah, the love triangle is definitely a big part of, I would say, I'm trying to, it's not all of them, but a lot of them do have big love triangles. I'm trying to think of some of the big ones right now, but anyways.
Another question that kind of stems off of this for me, and I'm asking a lot of questions, mostly because I'm very new to reading Murakami, and it's just such a big author to try to tackle. So I'm trying to get my understanding from all angles.
Yeah.
What would you say his style is? You mentioned it wasn't Japanese, but it's very contemporary, and to me, it feels when you read it very disjointed. It jumps everywhere. So how would you talk about that juxtaposition of style?
Okay, now that's his style becomes more and more clear as you understand what his influences are, and he references a lot of his influences in all of his books. He's very Kafkaesque. He really tries to draw heavily on the loneliness that you'll find in Kafka and the really mysterious series of events that are always happening to a lone character. He does these really great monologues, and he does these isolating descriptions that are really, really powerful, and they really draw out what he's trying to convey, that emotion. So he draws from Kafka, he draws from J.D. Salinger, he draws from John Updike even.
Oh, nice.
He knows English very well. He's actually translated some English books to Japanese. So he really knows how American writers and English writers write, and he's incorporated that into his own style. So the end result is a very mystical kind of thing. I always try and compare Murakami to like how a dream would happen. When you experience a dream, at least for me, and I've talked to a couple other people about this, and you can check in. I'm curious what you think about this. This is my theory on Murakami.
Okay.
When you read Murakami, it's kind of like a dream is happening, because when you're dreaming, you have this laser beam focus that goes around, and new events are kind of added in to your whole experience. And as that new big weird thing is added onto your dream, you accept it and you just move on. There's not really a big resistance in your mind. And when you do resist it, that's when you wake up, right?
Yeah, I like that point. The word that really sticks out is acceptance. The magical realism that he uses in his writing is so strange. I'll just bring up one part from the Wind Up Bird Chronicles. He literally goes down into an abandoned well just so he could have a quiet place to think. Not like a garden, small variety, cute well, but like a large hole in the ground. And this is directly after a friend of his dies that was he a prisoner of war? He was right. He was captured.
He was captured, yeah. He was a POW. Not really like in a prison camp, but...
Right. But this guy was thrown down a well also. So it feels natural and logical the way that he writes. I accept what he says automatically, but it's very strange. It's very, very strange.
Yeah. So do you agree with that whole, like something really weird in everyday life? You would see it as really weird, and you might question it, but for some reason, the way it's presented in Murakami, it just makes total sense. Even though there's like this really strange girl he meets in the first 5 minutes who starts talking about like having this big ball in your arm that you would cut out and start playing with. And it's really weird.
Yeah.
But you would think that person would be so surreal if you met him in real life. But
it's not. It's so matter of fact and commonplace, which adds to that like magical realism.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of flavor.
So you felt like that was...
Yeah, okay. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, okay. It's kind of difficult to convey it's actually a term. It's a literary term, the Murakami mystique.
Really?
Yeah, it's a literary term. It's kind of Kafkaesque. It's Murakami mystique. It's the mystique that comes along with his narration.
Wow, that should be his Marvel comic book name.
Yeah, Mystique. I like that. Oh wow, that was weird. So that's how you got into him, in the middle of a book. That's really cool.
Yeah.
My experience to get introduced to him was a little different, but we can talk about that in a little bit, I guess. Or we can...
No, go for it.
Yeah, I'll talk about it now, actually. I got introduced to Murakami in college. I had a Japanese film as visual literature class that I was taking, and my professor, Mr. Sorensen, who is a Japanese man with a English last name,
nice.
He showed us a film called Tony Takitani, which is by a great director by Jun Ishikawa. I believe that's how you say his last name. Let me double check here. I have it pulled up on all my notes. I don't want to mispronounce it. Yeah, Ichikawa. That's correct. And I was in this really kind of strange place in my life where I was working all the time, and I was very, I wouldn't say I was super lonely, but at the same time, you're in college, I was single, and I just kind of was doing my own thing. And I watched Tony Takitani, and it's about this, he's an artist, he's a technical artist. And he draws these really accurate drawings of, anyways, as an adult, that's what he does. And so this is this character, and it's a short story that he wrote for the New Yorker that they turned into an hour and 35-minute movie. And it's this really somber piano music that plays the whole time, and it's a narrator, and there's 3 actors.
So very minimal.
Yeah.
Very Japanese.
Yes, absolutely. And the entire movie is a solid pan right. And it doesn't do anything besides it stays still sometimes, but then eventually it pans right. And
that's interesting.
Right? And it's like you're reading a book or unraveling a scroll.
I was going to make the scroll metaphor. So it follows that cultural form of art, just taking something technical like drawing into cinema.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so I was just mesmerized by this entire film. And I went up to my professor afterwards. I said, what's going on with this book? Or who wrote this? What's going on with the movie? And he's like, oh, you got to read this, this, and this. Because Tony Takitani is written by Murakami, and so I read the short story, and then I just dove right into the books in the order that my Professor Sorensen recommended I read them in. And it was a life-changing, one of those life-changing events, I guess. So I was really happy with that order that he recommended. I started off with Wild Sheep Chase.
Okay.
Which is it's the third in the trilogy of The Rat, which is his original trilogy. So in 1981, I believe, Murakami was at a baseball game, and he got the sudden inspiration to write a book for the first time. He was 29 years old, and he owned a very successful jazz club. And he's just like, you know what I should do is write a book one day at a baseball game. So he did that. Went home, and 10 months later, he had a award-winning book that he had submitted to a couple of literary competitions.
That's so rare. That just doesn't happen to everybody.
Yeah. Well, you have to think both his parents were literature professors,
yeah.
And he was a more avid reader than I was. He had a really wide experience as far as what he'd read, so I think that really helped him be a good writer, and super smart guy too.
Oh yeah, your influence is always so important with art, with writing, everything.
Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the best things that makes Murakami such a good writer is his so much life experience. He has he constantly references music throughout the entire book, which really adds life to the book. It really breathes into it when he starts referencing all these classical songs, and then there's this songs from the 60s and the 70s, and it really adds music to the whole book. I don't know, what do you think about that? Like, he keeps bringing up music. Did that help the book at all, or?
I think so. I think it drives home a lot of metaphors, and it makes it more real.
Mm-hmm.
Helps, especially specificity. Whenever he's so specific, you can almost put that music on in the background and then read it, and it makes it even more powerful. Yeah.
Well, when he writes, he puts records on all day. He's a gigantic record collection. So we've got bookshelves filled with books. He's got bookshelves filled with records.
That's amazing.
In his office. He writes with a pencil, by the way. So yeah, if you go on his website, you can see a really cool photo. Like, there's a virtual tour of his entire office.
What?
Yeah. Check out his website, Murakami.com, or Murakami.com.
You guys should check out his website, Murakami.com.
Yeah. That's really awesome. He's got like all his yellow pencils lined up. He uses wooden pencils that he sharpens. And yeah, it's really cool to see his office.
That's awesome.
Yeah. No, and he's really kind of reclusive. He doesn't like the fame that he's gotten, which is why he's sort of slowed down as the years have progressed. He kind of is trying to fade into obscurity because he doesn't like all the attention he's been getting. Like so many of like my favorite artists and authors, they don't like the fame that comes along with them presenting what their view of the world is. I know Bill Watterson wrote Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, that's right.
He's one of my favorites. He's the reason I started reading, actually, Calvin and Hobbes. But you can't get a hold of him. He disappeared in the woods in Wyoming or something.
You can't blame him.
Yeah, I know, right? He got so famous, and people wanted to franchise all his stuff and merchandise all of it. But that's I'm sorry, I'm jumping over to Calvin and Hobbes. But
speaking of Calvin and Hobbes,
okay,
totally not related to Calvin and Hobbes, by the way, but I was wondering if you'd like to share with me a couple of your favorite Murakami moments, like some of those standout sections in books that were just, you mentioned earlier, life-changing.
Okay,
So I'm wondering about some of those passages that you can remember.
Okay, absolutely. One of the really things that stood out for me when I was reading Murakami was some of the conversations he has in Norwegian Wood. And Norwegian Wood takes place as a college student, and that's when I was reading him when I was in college, so that helped a lot. So if you're in high school or college age, I think it really adds a lot to the story. But as an adult, it's still just as cool. When he meets someone for the first time, the subjects that they cover are so varied, but so amazingly interesting. Talking about, like, Midori is one of the characters in Norwegian Wood. He goes and hangs out with her for an afternoon, and they talk about what true love is. And that was a really funny conversation because she's talking about what she really wants out of her ideal partner, and he's just kind of listening to her. And she bounces off some really funny ideas. Like, I think she says, I'm paraphrasing here really horribly, I might add. Somewhere along the lines of, I determined that what I wanted out of a guy is complete and utter loyalty. And he goes, well, what does that mean? That's the main character saying, what does that mean? And she says, well, I want him to, if I were to say I want some strawberry shortcake, I want him to drop everything that he's doing, run out and buy me some strawberry shortcake and bring it back. And then when he brought it back, I would take the strawberry shortcake and I'd throw it out the window.
What?
And say, I don't want that anymore. And he would say, oh, I'm sorry, what a fool I've been. Of course, I should have realized you would have wanted something else by the time I got back. What would you like now?
Is it a cycle? And it just keeps going endlessly?
No, it doesn't go. And she gets to, she comes to a culminating point at the end of it where she says, and then he'd bow down and kiss my feet, and then he's like, that's really weird, and what would you do? And she's like, and then I'd love him just as much for doing that for me. So it was just complete submission to her. At the same time, she would completely give him all the love that he deserved as a result of being so just whipped.
That's funny.
Yeah, and that's what she wanted out of her.
That's very funny.
Yeah, right. And you're like, that's a really weird way of looking at love, but that's what she wanted.
It works. It's reciprocal.
Yeah.
So at least it's fair.
Uh-huh. And then another one that I really liked was he was talking about one of his backpacking journeys. Same book, Norwegian Wood. After Dark's got some great conversations, I might add. There's this scene that takes place in a diner, and there's this guy, young kid, who walks in and he meets a couple of girls, and he starts talking to them about recording music. And anyways, I'm sorry, I'm trying to jump around. There's so many cool scenes, and I'm trying to capture them perfectly.
Wasn't there one that you started telling me about that has two completely unrelated story curves? Okay. Two totally unrelated people living two totally different lives. And somehow in the middle of the book, they intersect or they meet each other at the end?
That's actually a common theme of his books.
Okay.
So you've got South of the Border, West of the Sun, 1Q84, and then Hard-Boiled Wonderland at the beginning of the world. And the end of the world, I'm sorry. So, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the end of the world is really interesting. I can talk about that for a little while, and hopefully we have some time. I don't want to feel like we're... I don't want to feel rushed, but Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the end of the world starts off with this guy who is in a... He walks into this village, and they take away his shadow, and he's... interacting with a giant, and they lock him in town, and they're like, okay, here's your job. You've been assigned a task. Your task is to be skull reader. You're going to go to the library.
Skull reader?
Yeah. And you're
like SKULL.
You're a memory reader, or I forget.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So you go, and there's these skulls in the library, and he has to go, and he learns how to read the memories out of the skulls, and that's what his job is in the town. And he gets assigned to living quarters, and there's this whole life that he has in this weird village. And then it cuts over to this other character, totally different guy, who is he's like what's the word? You encrypt stuff, I guess, digitally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's what he does. He encrypts data. So he goes and he has this job where he's encrypting data for the scientist. Inside of he has a personal encryption code that he uses, and he's encrypting a bunch of data, and he's got this he's in real life today, Tokyo, totally unrelated. And suddenly these two worlds become very relevant to each other, which is really weird because you don't know how you'd form a connection between the two of them.
But that's pulling on the magical realism again too.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a good point to drive home. And then 1Q84 is fascinating. That's about Ayame and I forget the main character, the guy's name. That's really embarrassing, but that's his latest book. I've only read that once so far. So I've read a lot of his books twice, but I've only read his most recent one. It's really thick. It's actually 3 books, but he released 3 different separate ones, but it's one book. You can buy one in American English.
English. I speak American.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of all of these books that he has, I have a theory that I want to bounce off of you.
Okay, go ahead.
So one thing that I've been thinking about is why Murakami is so popular and such a necessity for people to read when they study and think about contemporary literature. Mm-hmm. And I've come up with this theory, so you'll have to let me know what you think.
Okay.
I think that his books stop becoming books and they start becoming vessels for a constantly evolving message. Know what I mean by that? It seems like every person that I talk to about Murakami, they keep the book around, and every time they read it, they walk away with something completely different. Mm-hmm. So it almost stops just being a story, and it starts being almost an alive, constantly evolving, fluid organism that can keep giving you insight via these characters and their discussions. Do you think it's possible for that to be the case, or is it even possible for a book to do that?
Absolutely, I do. I think that's what all good books end up doing. So I think that's very possible. That's a good way of putting it. I like that theory. Of course, it's untestable. So
unless you reread everything hundreds of times in your lifetime, every single book.
But yeah, I remember us having a conversation kind of similar to this, where we were talking about like James Joyce and a couple of other authors, where you just walk away with something different each time. But Murakami, I know that what you're referencing is a little different than what the conversation was about. So yeah, that's very possible. You are going to get a different experience, and much like, that comes back to kind of what I was saying with the dream thing. Everybody interprets their dreams a little different too.
Nice. Do you think everyone interprets Murakami differently?
Absolutely. Everyone's going to experience it differently because of the way he writes. It's going to be the same story, but in the end, it's also going to be very personal.
It is. It feels like you're right there next to him. And maybe it's just he writes in so much universal truth into the characters and the dialogue that every time you read those dialogues in his book, you take away something else. Yeah. I don't know. It's a very perplexing thought to think about a book that way.
Yeah, absolutely. But I like how you word that. That's a very good way of putting it. What's funny is, have you ever heard anyone that didn't like Murakami, by the way?
I haven't, but I've met a lot of people that don't know anything about Murakami or who he is.
So I recommend Murakami to a lot of my friends, a lot of people, and I've had some people come back and they actually don't like it.
What don't they like? Out of curiosity.
There's a lot of detail, and they feel like not much happens. So, and to some extent, I am like, okay, I can kind of understand what you're coming from there. They just don't dive into the whole experience, right? And if you don't read a lot, I feel like Murakami's not a great author. If you read a lot, he becomes great because he uses that medium so well, the literature medium. He communicates with words very well. But if you're not a reader, I feel like it kills it sometimes with the over detail, and the flow is killed sometimes.
Yeah, and I feel like that might be a good disclaimer. If you're picking up Murakami for the first time, you need to have a sense of complete abandon. You really need to think about just setting aside the outside world for a little while and just jumping in with both feet and almost saying, like, no matter what, I am going to finish this book and I'm going to be, because it sucks you into another universe.
Absolutely.
So I think when you tackle one of his books, you need to stick with it because it's very, very rewarding. And
one thing I wanted to ask you you're a new reader to Murakami. Yeah. Did you ever hit moments where you felt like it was getting a little boring and a little dragged out? Because most people I talk to, they have that problem.
Sometimes. To be honest, it's like he knows that that's coming. So he'll push a scene all the way to the edge until it can't go anymore, and then he'll change it. So it's almost very merciful. He drags it out, but then, you know that there's a purpose to it and it'll change. So I think I almost got to that point a couple of times, but not anywhere that I would have stopped reading.
Oh, okay. I actually did stop reading him when I was first starting reading Murakami. I did stop a couple of times for like maybe a week. I'd take a week break where I was like, I
A
can't
week's
read.
not bad.
Yeah. But for me, that's bad. Like, I almost never stop for that long unless I really don't like the book. But I kind of, mentally, it was like riding a bike up a hill sometimes, where you get up there and then like you just coast down. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, yeah. So you had that experience too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we shared that. Awesome.
So would you recommend that this is a good place for people to start with Murakami, Wind Up Bird?
I would say Professor Sorensen was right. I think that you need to start off with Wild Sheep Chase, actually.
Nice.
I think that was a good choice for you, actually, because you're a bit more experienced reader. I don't know how to describe it, but
You said I'm smart. Just kidding.
but
I'm not. I'm really not.
the way getting introduced to Murakami, that's one of the best stories to start off with. And then he does write a ton of short stories, by the way. So if you ever want to look up and just want a quick afternoon read, check out some of his short stories. He has a collection of those called Blind Willow, Sleeping Woman. Should be
There you go.
And then there's also The Elephant Vanishes, those are both collections of his short stories.
Wasn't South of the Border, West of the Sun, was that a novel or a short story?
I'm pretty sure that was a novel.
Oh, okay.
That's a novel. That's actually, no, that's absolutely a novel. It's about a man who owns a bar club, or a jazz club, and he runs it, and he's middle-aged, and it's basically about Murakami, I'm pretty sure.
Autobiographical a little bit?
A little bit,
Yeah.
but he draws from some interesting, and I don't think it's exactly autobiographical, but there's a lot of theories on that. I've read a lot of different things, and I don't know what to think on it. I think he poured himself into the character a little bit, but you should read that too, by the way. So that's everything I know about Murakami as far as what we can talk about in half an hour.
In a nutshell. And I really thank you, Dust Jacket, for having me on. I hope that you guys will pick up some of his work. It is such a good read. It is so worth it. Mm-hmm. And please post some questions and some comments below for us. We'd love to talk to you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, cool. And then I know it's like we've got a couple minutes left. So let's talk about, that's Murakami, but let's talk about what else you're reading right now. What
else I'm reading?
Yeah, what else are you reading right now? What's exciting?
So for me, I love poetry. I'm definitely a writer.
Uh-huh.
I love lyrical prose. So that's a good question. My all-time favorite is Ami Césaire. Mm-hmm. Amazing French writer. Just very strange. Very, very strange work. But
you lent me his book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very strange poetry. But it's very beautiful at the same time. I don't know. Maybe not beautiful is the right word, but it definitely was a good... See, I was reading the translation, though. I feel like some of it's lost. Mm-hmm. And it's very beautiful in French.
Yes, it is.
Looking over the French translation, because she lent me the one with the French and the English.
Yep.
So, but yeah, we should talk poetry with you sometime soon. Hopefully that'll...
It's good stuff.
Yeah. I've just started reading Robert Frost in my free time. So
nice.
Which is
He's a giant.
Yeah.
He's a giant.
He is. Yeah. So... he's a bit more, I don't know, I feel like you like flow of consciousness poetry. Is that correct? Or
Kerouac stuff?
Kerouac?
Yeah. I love Ginsberg. I love Allen Ginsberg.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I haven't quite worked up to that yet. I like the old stuff a little bit. I guess the romantic, and I'm learning how to get into poetry. It's I feel like you learn how to do it, but I don't think it is so learned. It's just supposed to be felt, right?
It used to be.
Yeah.
It used to be in ancient Greece.
Mm-hmm.
The poet was above the philosopher.
Oh, yeah. Well, I believe
Fun fact.
Fun fact. All right, guys. Well, cool. So, I think hopefully viewers, what do you think about our guest? Let us know. She doesn't have to read the comments. We'll just keep that between you and me, okay? But that was a fun show. Thank you very much for coming on. It was really awesome to talk to somebody who just read Murakami for the first time.
And I hope that you guys pick him up too.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's anything else we can help you guys with as far as getting started on reading more books, let us know. And thank you. I guess that's it. So until then.
Until next time, keep reading, everybody.
Yeah, we let our guests in, so you guys take care.